Thank you for inviting me in the first instance, and you always start these mornings with a bit of nerves about who's in the audience and sort of where you're going to get to by the time you've sort of finished. And I note we've had 10 minutes eaten into by the first start, so do I still have 10 minutes at the end? Okay, thank you. I just thought, just to get going and a bit of a background, it's very pertinent at the moment to reflect on the Olympic Games, and you hear all sorts of things, but we all have different bits and pieces. And one of the things, besides agriculture, I've had a big part in has been the equestrian sports. And I've been chairman of selectors for the equestrian team for the last 5 Olympics and finishing at London. So I've had a sort of a good role in the international politics and the realms. And we sat down in 2008 or 2005 actually, looking at what the strategic plan should be for how we were going to get some better performances in Beijing, London and Rio. And as part of the overall package, we had to work with the Australian Olympic Committee because they had some money. We have to work with government because they actually invest in different areas and different sports. You've got to work with your own sporting organisation because they collect some funds. You know, we pay membership fees and it gets an accumulated fund, so they invest at high performance programs. And then you have the individuals. People don't count what people spend as individuals at these sort of exercises, and I can tell you in the equestrian game, it's a bucket load. I've been in the probably unfortunate position of taking a couple of horses overseas, and I can tell you it's not a cheap exercise. The issue is, though, it's not really that different to what we're actually trying to look at here. We have a whole range of things we want to put in the pot. We have KPIs we need to set. Easy in the Olympics is, do you get a medal? Do you finish in the top 10? What's the goal you're setting? There is a significant investment that's made. What you do have, of course, is time, and so we set 12-year plans. It's sort of a rolling 4, and then you have World Games in between, so it's every 2 years. It's all about how do we renovate the work that we do, and so it's constantly setting them. And there's this one big measurement at the end of the 4-year cycle. Did we or didn't we get a medal? Well, we've got 1 bronze and we're in the top bracket for the last event tonight. So I've got another late night tonight. But I suppose the part of the message is, well, you know, there are a lot of people that are trying to work on what they're doing, where they're going, how they're going to go about it. What do we have to put into the pot, and where do we work on these things? And I reflect on it and think, well, there's not a great deal of difference between what we've been doing in that area and what we've been doing in the sort of general agricultural scheme of things. So what I'm going to try and take us through is sort of where we are and what's doing and sort of some of the changes. I have been working with grower groups for a very long time, as Clancy outlined, and I have to say that the 10 years I spent with Condon was just sensational. It was the right time, right place, and we got to bang and crash machinery around the place. And you know, my thing of innovation at that time, before the social media, was to actually send out 200 little box cameras in the post to people to take a photo of their innovations on their boom sprays. Today you could do that in 5 minutes, but it was a planned exercise, addresses, identify who's got what innovations and collate and collect. And it was all very, and I was fortunate at the time. I'd broken my leg, and so I was in hospital for a couple of weeks, and I had all this information coming back, and that's all I did was sort through photos and innovations. And today you can do that so swiftly, quickly, and with a great deal of ease. So where are the grower groups? You've got a whole mix of things in here at the moment, and I put the grower groups at the top because that is actually the customer. And when you look at all the other parts around it, the grower groups represent the farmers that actually put their money into the exercise and contribute, whether it's livestock or whether it's grains or whatever industry it might be, horticulture. That's the pointy end of the exercise. Wrapped around that are these other parts to it. So we've got the corporates, the sponsors who provide the support and the interaction, and there's a benefit in there because there's some investment. There's universities for the research and development and the underpinning science that's required, and how do we innovate and renovate the new scientists that can come on board. DAFWA, and I'll talk a bit about the future directions a little bit. I'm allowed a little bit, bit further on. But you know, when you look at what DAFWA's done in the last 30 years, one of the biggest things I found in interviewing hundreds of people and looking through what DAFWA has is that most of us have no idea what DAFWA does and what it actually has. And just a simple little example, I asked everyone pretty much, how many people do you think we employ at DAFWA? The answer was between 400 to 500 was the average, and it's 975. And then you sort of like, well, what do they do? Well, it's actually so much work that's in there, the investment that's been made. And I don't get too enthusiastic because there's a lot of brickbats as well, but on the way through, let's just not throw everything out in the baby with the bathwater. Research and development corporations, and I'm not just looking at GRDC, we've got all the other myriad in there as well, from RERDIC to HIA to MLA to AWI, all contribute to that, and it's our passport to actually access funds from the government, because whilst the farmers put in their contribution and their levies, it is where we get those matching funds, and it allows that to then accumulate up. The issue is getting balance between how those funds are managed, invested, and put to use. Consultants, and I talk about the one-on-one farm management consultants, but also the myriad of agronomists and support people that are out in the corporate sector. They play such an important role in interpreting, working with, conversations on the way through. And so there's a whole part of this practical interaction on the way through that we need to work with. Relationships and collaborations are the key to maintaining these links, and we need to work out how we can do that. There's growth and opportunity and expansion of both geographical spread and the industry sectors covered by the group. So when you look at what GGA is trying to do, we've assisted both the Carnarvon, the Gascoyne Food Council, the Southern Forest Food Council, in starting what it is they've started and got to the next stage. I think we've probably done strategic plans for, I don't know, a dozen of the grower groups, but we're now working with quite a few of the pastoral bodies as well. And so it's not just those sort of immediate southwest area, it's right throughout the state. And we're soon to do some work out in the pastoral zone in Kalgoorlie as well. So there's a lot of people, and it's all about how do we gather the producers who want to do something. And so there's producer-led delivery of programs, there's biosecurity, there's marketing, natural resource management, Indigenous landholders, horticulture, pastoral improvement programs. They're all opportunities for how we can actually learn from each other. And I'll have a couple of examples a bit later on. So the emerging trends, and some of you may have seen this little graphic that was put out by CSIRO last year. It was a good report, because we've all seen graphs of Asian consumption and what's promising in front of us. But the CSIRO report came out towards the end of last year, I thought captured what were some of these really big trends that are out there. And so, when you look through and say the hungrier world, what does it mean? I mean, it's improvements in productivity will rely on strong innovation systems. It's what we need to have. The wealthier world means we need to maintain and extend our reputation as suppliers of high quality product. Choosy consumers, opportunity for rural industries to demonstrate credence characteristics, and by that I'm talking about traceability, quality control, and looking at what technology we can bring into it. Then the transformative technologies, we need these sophisticated tools to assist in decision making. And then lastly, the bumpier ride, systems can be designed to anticipate, prepare for and respond to these changes, and the skills that are required to make that happen. So the emerging trends really, if you look on the left-hand side of the screen there, it's about exploiting smart farming solutions. It's about decision making. How can we get better decision making to improve productivity? How do we adapt to change? How can we look at the value markets and value chain? We've had this sort of push and this notion about let's create the value chain. And I think we've still been taking quite a long time to understand, well, where do we fit? How does it work, and what do we need to do inside that? And the last bit then is about infrastructure. The biggest infrastructure that keeps on popping up every time we have a conversation is our connectivity. How can we, if we're going to have all this sort of data that's rolling around, if we want to have communications, it has to be about making sure that we can actually do the stuff. How can we get the data downloads? And there's a lot of push going on to make things happen in that regard. And wherever we think we're not today, think where we were yesterday. We are better today than we were yesterday, and we will definitely be better tomorrow. And so it's a question of what do we need to do to fast track that, and how to work with that. So when you're looking at the emerging trends and the big things, what does that then mean for the person on the farm themselves. And realistically, it doesn't matter a great deal of what sort of farming you're in. If you look at the business dynamics that are inside the whole exercise, and you put this person, this business, this couple usually, in the middle as a farm business, and talking about the investment, talking about the risk and the bits and pieces, what do we actually have to deal with? It's complex, it's scale, there's an awful lot of things on people's plates. And so if we as grower groups, if we as organisations want to involve a farmer, a grower, a producer in the exercise, we really need to think about, well, where are we actually going to fit in this whole scheme? Because everywhere around that traps, and if you look at the grain industry, you've got the input suppliers and RD&E, Farm Advisor. That's really a front end. If you move around to livestock, then you start to sort of move right around to sort of 10, 11 o'clock and move into the processors and marketers. And we have to deal with agents, and you've got to deal with processors and getting detail of that. And if you get into horticulture, you then start to deal with the retailers. And if you think you have a hard time dealing with different people inside the grains industry, you wait till you deal with Coles, Woolies and Aldi at the same time. And then you've got the agents that work out of Perth markets who won't get out of bed for less than 15% of your product. It's not as bad as the wine industry because they don't get out of bed for 30%. So, you look at where we are in these different scheme of things. And so we have to bring all these things together as producers. And how do we actually fit our other things like the community, worrying about education for the not only paying for the education for the children, but how we actually then move through and deal with that, lend that support. And there was a time many years ago when I was sent off to boarding school, Mum and Dad would come and pick me up every 3 months and take me home for a couple of weeks and then send me back again, and the odd little letter on the way through. Now it's interactive. Have you got to the class on time? Have you got your homework with you? Have you done your assignment? It's all on the text, and the interaction is so much more. Issues to do with health, environment, communication. And it also depends too, if we're trying to compete for the time and the resources, there are a host of other demanding priorities, and it also depends on the stage of life of the individual. With the children, a 2-year-old compared to when they're at high school, or whether you finally manage to kick them out the front door, and without them coming back every 5 minutes. So there's a whole range of dynamics in there. And then let's look, and Rebecca talked about it early on, what the grower groups are good at. There's a lot of members and a lot of part to it. And there's a whole range of things there that we can really put a nail in and say, this is what the grower groups are good at different levels. And there's great opportunities, and the social component. You look at last week's Countryman, there was the Separate Ladies Day, and sort of putting in the social component, but it was dealing with a whole range of issues as well as farming that actually impacts on farming. And so it's just as important as any of the other aspects to it. So it's about developing the knowledge and how do we actually meet these sort of changing production, climate, market challenges. And we'll come back to a bit further on down the track is access to growers for companies, sponsors, government and industry. I've worked with pretty well every agricultural minister since Ernie Bridge, and it's always been a priority for each minister to actually work with the grower groups in one way, shape or form. And so it's a really important part of the exercise. So the bit that we've been doing, I suppose, in the last 15 years is working with the grower groups and helping develop strategic plans. And one of the things, I had to do a bit of work 2 years ago for the Western rock lobster industry. You might say, where do we go with that? And I have to say, there's not a great difference between the fishermen and farmers. There's the same attitude, same mentality. The rock lobster industry is a bit more bullish because they're out in different neck of the woods, but they asked us to do a report card on where we were going. And so one of the things that we developed, and I've just done a little snapshot here of a report card, and the report card actually went through somebody's strategic plan and looked at what they said they were going to do as part of their sort of tactics and activities, and went through each part, and I've just done a little snapshot here because otherwise it doesn't fit on the slide, but it's saying, well, okay, of the strategy you were going to deliver or try to deliver, how do we rate that? So besides putting a number on it, let's put a rating like a scorecard report. Why? And obviously there's a lot of information behind this. And so, when you look at the things that the grower groups say they are good at, yes, they are good at them, because it's the interaction with local research focus, member contact and feedback. It gets an A, it's sort of trending along, but it's driven by a committee. The strength of why it was there is that particular committee was actually driving pretty hard, but needs a little more interactivity with members. How do we get that? Production-focused events. Again, very well done, appreciated by participants. That's the fun, that's the sexy stuff that gets them out there and playing the game. We're very good at professionally managing the business with sound systems and governance. We've got good people in executive roles. Some are better than others, but at the end of the day, there's a good investment there. But again, it comes to that leadership of what's inside the boards and how we make those things work. One down there is continue in-depth relationships with sponsors and view them as members. There's a good body of sponsors, but not nearly enough. And when you start to look at the dollars and cents that's required and all the groups that require their own funding initiatives just to run, you start to question, well, can we continue down this path? So we just looked at that, and some of the things that then come in is how do we actually create the space as a grower group to evaluate the value and offering to members, your own individual operations, and keep track and maintain relevance. Do you ask members how you're performing, and do you ask the non-members why they don't join, and what does it would take to get them to join? And there's a whole range of reasons why or not. And it tends to sort of vary a bit then with the life cycle. And you've all seen the life cycle of life and death and business. I was in Sydney on Monday giving a talk about farm succession to the Rabobank executive program, and you've got 30-odd people that are sort of knee-deep in doing their strategic planning and getting stuck into everything, and clearly they spent 10 grand to be there for the week. They're sort of focused on what they're doing, but they're all depending where they are in this life cycle as to what's doing. And so how do we adapt to the changing dynamics and maturity of your individual group? How do we look at that? How do you then understand the life cycle you're at today? How does that then relate to the risk that you have and the risk you will take or not? And that's the same in business. And you think of parents, when your parents, if you're looking at the succession in farming, it's no different to the life cycle of groups. And you get to a point where you've made the hard yards, you put in the work, you've got to a point that's comfortable. Next generation moves in. Do we want to take the risk and use all that spare capital or the spare balance sheet to go back in and do it again? How do we actually invigorate that? So how do we get to be clear about where we are on that curve? How do we understand the group's appetite for change and innovation and renovation? There is a default position, and you hear it quite a bit with a range of groups, that we get to the maturity sort of point, let's step back and consolidate. And that's the next best thing to a death knell, because that's going to continue to decline down that path. So you can sustain it for a while, that's fine. So the question is, don't be scared of the future, plan for it. And it's really making sure that people are on board. How do we get the right people engaged? And how do we get the leadership that's revolved around it? That, of course, brings a range of challenges on the way through. And so what are the challenges that we do have to deal with? Where we are on this curve, how do I anticipate and respond and change the group dynamics? And when we're talking here, I've sort of totted up this morning, besides the 40-odd groups that are here, I totted up at least another 20-odd groups that I can sort of put a finger on. So we're up around that sort of 60, 75 groups, and all of them have got their different stages in this life cycle. All of them have got costs to run. All of them have got different things they need to achieve. So how do we maintain that relevance, energy and enthusiasm? So the securing sustainable income for continuity of staff and projects, it's a cost that's attached there, but it's also what you've become as part of the groups is this career starting point. It's a career midpoint. It's a career end point. So it's become a position that people want to actually be part of at different stages. And I know when I was at Condinin, I'd have many university graduates come in and say, can we have a job? And I was in a fortunate position that there was always a project coming out. Next month's rural research project had to have somebody do something, and so there was always a project we could give somebody to do and give them a start. And there's several people in the room today that have been through that initial sort of part as well. So recognising that part and that role of the grower groups is most important. There's careers for people, and how you work with that on the way through. Collaborating with others to maximise the outcomes, and that's where we go back to the first slide. It looks at all the players. How do we actually pull that together to work collaboratively to get the best outcome for what's happening? Identifying what's next, the impact, cost to deliver the science, how to continually push the boundaries in pursuit of breakthroughs, and then identifying the model for the next 20 years and how to resource it. I talk about 20 years, but if you go back to my example of Olympic Games, it's 4 by 4 by 4 by 4. It does not go away. And so how do we actually think about this ongoing planning basis and pull that into work? So what are the opportunities? We've got, I think, a huge number of opportunities right now in looking at what we can deal with. With the maturing of the grower group model, how can the model further evolve? You look at what's been changing. It's sort of rolling through different levels, different places. The shifting landscape in research funds brings new opportunities for R&D and E. Corporate partnerships, as part of the review we did with looking at the future directions for DAFWA, we had a lot of conversation about grower groups, but we also had a lot of conversation with corporate sector and how that interaction was happening and what the value was on the way through. And it varies considerably from the corporate sector's point of view. They understand they need to be there because if you're not there, you're square. How do we measure what we actually get from it? Is the expectation too high? Is it more than loyalty? What are the other things that we can actually get from that? Is it a contribution to the ongoing productivity of the industry? The other emerging opportunities is looking at the horticulture and the protein production, and by that the meat production. I'm working on a project at the moment in the Ord, which is actually how can we put a feedlot in the Ord to actually take the crops and put them through into a mouth to take it off in a box, rather than the transport issues or the overcoming the issues of hitting a ceiling so they can grow 1,400 tonne of pulse up there and get a really good price. 1,401, the price halves. And so it's how do we actually start to grow that beyond the next mix there. And whilst there may only be 4 or 5 producers there, that group is very dynamic and looking at ways of pushing the boundaries. So it actually brings us with a demand for a whole new reams of knowledge and how we pull those things together. Digital disruption, and if you thought that drones was the flavour of the month, you wait till you hear more and more about digital disruption, big data. And last night I went to the Science Awards with the Premier, and he announced the new chair of Big Data in Agriculture. It's a $1 million project that has been put up through Royalties for Regions. It's matched by Murdoch and Curtin. I was fortunate enough to sit on the selection panel, and Dr. Simon Cooke is going to take up that appointment. It was announced last night, so I'm not out of order. And in their submissions that we interviewed with people, every second line, grower groups came through that submission of how they wanted to do business, how they were going to connect with industry, what was going to happen. So how do we start to provide those linkages and work in a collaborative way? And again, I've mentioned before about the infrastructure side of things. Communication technologies, that's the sort of whole raft of things that we can deal with. So then what do we need to ask ourselves on the way through? What are some of the choices here? What functions could be shared for greater efficiencies? Administration, accounting, auditing, membership database management, grant writing, grant acquittal, insurances, HR management, sponsorship management, knowledge and IP management. How do we actually go down this path? How can we better collate, align, specialise activities to avoid duplication and maximise the effort and spend? It is a virtual world. We can't avoid that. I work in the Dropbox with some collaborators recently. We had 14 collaborators, one person managing the project and one Dropbox, and we produced a business plan for a $200 million project in 35 days because we actually had the technology to be able to do that and people were able to contribute in one space. I started late, remember? But I'll get there. How do we approach the corporate spec to be more professionally managed? We need to go beyond just the loyalty tag and the access tag. What do we actually need to do? Sit down and work out what other things can happen. How can the return to members, the value proposition, be more tangible, better recognised? One of the things you look at is, well, how much do people pay to be a member of a grower group and what do they actually get out of it? And there seems to be this price barrier, a couple $100 at best. But at the end of the day, there should be another zero on the end of that for the value that it actually produces on the way through. And I'm not sure how we actually go to the next step, but if you actually ask growers what they get from it, it is a significant value and contribution to their business. And they'll stump up with 10 grand for a consultant, they'll stump up 10 grand for the agronomist, for the accountant, they'll stump up 10, 15 grand for the marketing person, but someone that provides them with their information to make the decisions to actually put the right crop in the right ground at the right time, $150. So it's something I think we need to really tackle and address. And it's not the fault of anybody, but we've not sold the message. You know, we had to do it. We hear a lot about transformational. What does it mean? It is about creating an inspiring vision. It's about motivating people to buy into and deliver that vision. And it's about building stronger, trust-based relationships. And if you want an example of the most recent exercise in transformational, go and look in the newspapers in the last couple of months on Sundrop in Port Augusta. Now, I don't know if you've read or haven't read, but that's a $100 million investment that's now delivering 25% of Coles tomatoes, Trust tomatoes, right across Australia. And when I first saw this 12 months ago, I sent it up to the guys in Carnarvon who deliver $35 million worth of tomatoes and said, be very afraid. This will change the way you do business. What do we need to do to make a difference in there? When you look at different groups, and I've got three simple little examples here when you talk about, is it transformational or is it how different groups operate differently? And some of you know that I've been working with Sweeter Banana now since 2008. And what we've got up there is it's transformational change. They were led by the nose by the Queensland marketplace. They were led by the nose by the agents. And once a year, the agents go up there and throw the keg on and engage everyone's support for the next 12 months to get their 15% to come on board. I'm probably a bit unfair, but at the end of the day, it's now a very different marketplace. They go directly to Coles, Woolies, except when they don't have product when the cyclone came in, but they had done sufficient work behind the scenes to put a self-insurance plan together to pay for their premises and their CEO or the EO for 12 months with no income. And so they were able to get through out the other end of it because they had prepared and planned for their exercise. So models like this you can repeat perhaps for niche and high value crops. You know, think of the pulse industry and think of the chia industry or the quinoa industry. And so how do we actually deal with that? And it's fortunate, Shane, and picking up on what you were talking about before, the grower grants that came out recently. Now I went through these grower grants and when I first had a look at them there was 98 submissions. All good and true, because I wanted to understand where the thinking was around the state for this exercise. Now, I pulled out 4 of them, just in one particular field here, 5, sorry. There's $1.872 million in that little collection there. And every one of those bodies is now trying to do their own thing in their own time, in their own place. And that's to spread over 3 years. So we've got $400,000 to be spread over 3 years. Somebody's going to have to pay for the auditing, someone's going to pay for the management, we're going to have to employ different people, we're going to have to work our way around it. But if you take those particular 5, I have to say there are some really strong synergies between those 5 activities. Sure, they're in different parts of the state. What could we do with $1.872 million instead of breaking them up into lumps of 400? We could then go to, in this particular process, we can go to beyond WAMCO, we could go to MLA, we could go to some of the other bodies, corporate sponsorship, etc., and really make a difference. That should be 3.5 million, not 1.8. And then we can actually get somewhere about how we can do some things about it. I'm not saying it's too late or it's too soon or whatever it is, but it's just a consideration. The last example I've got is I went to this digital disruption conference in Sydney a month ago, and a couple of others that are here today went there as well, and I found it a really good conference. You'll have more of these conferences and you can poke a stick out in the next couple of years. It's the thing. But Delta Ag, which is an agronomy merchandise business, one of the issues they had was, well, we don't get good climate data because the rainfall levels, the probes and all things are too far apart. And so they've gone about and invested so that no farmer is more than 25 kilometres from a station. So they've got this whole map up and down the coast there from Wagga through to Narrabri, and they can actually have a commercial subscription with the growers, with the agronomists who've got the information available. It's resource use efficiency, targeted management, it improves the decision making and helps in the system resilience and some benchmarking as well, which is the next sort of key area. I'm now going to move to the DAFWA future directions. Now, I've delivered this 10 days ago. Mark's the only one in the room that's read it beside me, I think, at this stage. I had to sort of get a bit of permission to see what I could and couldn't deliver because I don't get to catch up with the Minister until next week. Future directions came out of a stocktake review, which was initiated by Minister Baston at the time, which was to do a review inside DAFWA. And I have to say, DAFWA did some amazing work in looking at the options they had to deal with. Now, what if we did not continue with this particular program for the next forever? What if we cut our program by 20%? What if we cut it by 50%? What do we really need to do? Because the funds have been cut back. So they actually really did a fantastic job in delivering to us. And from there, we were then asked to go and look at, well, what's the future direction? How do we actually go forward from there? We interviewed about 150 people, all up. And it was really about, looking at what's happened from this withdrawal of funds, withdrawal of services, loss of staff, confusion. What's the agency able to deliver? And so it was about redefining what its priorities are, collaborate and engage with industry and demonstrate capacity to deliver. So we actually presented the report that has two key principles, which is not quite what it's been doing in the last couple of years. Some areas it has. Science and innovation underpin DAFWA's capacity to develop and defend Western Australian agriculture and food. So the develop and defend is about the two key words that we're looking for. All activities are done in partnership with industry. And I think that's also something that we need to really take into account. How do we actually deal with the partnership with industry? And it's not about we know best. It's not about independence. It's about how do we work collaboratively across the board. So we've actually got 8 key priorities, and you can read them as a way through, and there's behind this, there's about 250 pages of this DASH report. You can get most of it in the first 14, so it's okay. It's not going to be too bad, but you have to have the evidence underpinning the decisions that we arrived at. And certainly Kevin Goss and Peter Nixon and myself spent many hours, weekends, evenings, in the interaction between having one document we're working on a Dropbox and all the work that goes with it. And it was a very interesting process because I've been used to working quite singly in these projects for a while. But innovate and relevant science to develop competitive and sustainable ag industries, biosecurity underpinning, to defend the food provenance, the integrity and brand, collaborative efforts across the sectors, pathways for trade, domestic and international investment in future leadership, both inside the department but also in the industry. And I think if I had to walk away with two things, one will be about the biosecurity and the second will be about leadership. We've dropped off the perch. A lot of people around this room were invested in leadership 15 years ago, and we've got a gap coming up where we're going to need to backfill that, and it's something we need to deal with. Improved understanding and respect between producers and consumers. That's that whole realm of how do we interact with those people again, and an internal management capacity. DAF was really, if you go back 30 years, the investment that was made 30 and 20 years ago is coming to fruition today. We've got it now. We need to go back and reinvest in those areas, and so how do we actually deal with that? I've still got my 10 at the other end. I'm nearly there. So developing grower group strategies. How do we actually then move forward in some of these exercises? It's capitalise on the solid foundations and reputational brand. You have got a sensational brand. What do we do with it? At the moment, it's just grower groups. Well, how do we actually build on that? What does it mean? What's the value to it? How can we actually work that better? How do we get both ends of the scale all engaged? Can we be leaner, reduce replication and collaborate better? The value in capturing the skills, knowledge and relationships. When someone leaves a job as an EO or a researcher, where's that information that they've got walking around their head? It just walked out that door, unless we capture it in some form of database management. Sure, their research projects are written up, but how they did it, where they did it, where's the history of things that went there. Let's capture more of that. Looking at the change in research environment, can we step up? Do we have enough of a say in what's happening there? Capacity building, industry integration with universities, DAFA and corporates. There is so much talent in those universities, it's unbelievable. There is so much talent inside DAFA that we just don't know where it is in tap. And then there's the private sector who's got so much talent. How do we bring that together to focus it in what we need? And then being able to build an accessible shared virtual knowledge bank. It can be hierarchical, different access, different people, technology is available. Capitalising on new communications technology. And then the last one here is representative capacity at state and national levels. And where is our seat at the table when determining research priorities, policy and funding? And the sooner we actually have a very strong voice at that level, because we actually do represent the investment that's made. And I'll talk about a little bit about the investment in just a moment. What if we do the same? We can just keep plodding along. Yep, we'll still get good outcomes. We've still got good things to do. But we're going to continuously compete for that R&D funds or compete for sponsorship. If you go and speak to the ANZ banks and the CSBPs and the elders and the landmarks, there's a competition every day and people got to make decisions. When I was at Continent, there was no choice. Yep, you're it. And we generated $1 million in sponsorship, $1 million in R&D funds. There was no competition at that stage. Whereas now it's got to be, here's the pie, chop, 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 and it's going to continue to go that way. We're drowning in data. Where is it? The information work that was done. I remember doing a project on time to Lyme in 1987, for heaven's sake. It's still rolling its way through. But all that information, all that data is sitting there. Human capital. How do we attract and retain good staff? Do we watch memberships decline? There is a reduction in the number of farmers. So how do we actually deal with that? We're struggling to get committee members. It's a hard thing to finish your day's work, deal with the kids, and then go off to a meeting, or a whole day. I was speaking to Ian Longston before, when you do something like this, it's a 2-day preparation to prepare a talk like this so you can actually make sure you got the messages right. And that's fine because it's part of the deal. But then you look at committee members and asking people to do things. How much time can they afford? And the pay, of course, and do we just repeat ourselves, or can we break some new ground? So actually, my last slide, and I'm nearly there. If we actually look at new ground and say, can we act local and resource globally? I suppose this is my sort of endpoint theme for you for the rest of the conversation. The purpose may broaden. The R&D and E side of things, where do we fit and who's going to do that? Plus, how do we actually look at where we want to go down that supply chain? Can we learn from what horticulture is doing? Because they are doing some great stuff. They started work at the market, and as soon as they did the market part, they've had to work their way back down to talk about their quality systems, to talk about the production systems, to talk about their own skills. And so when we did the planning for citrus, it was all about let's grow the market. There were 5 citrus growers that deliver 85% of the product. There was another 200 that participate, but they make all the noise and they contribute a little bit, but you've got to get the balance right and through there. Infrastructure. Where do we play that game in infrastructure as grower groups on the way through? How can we make that work? The bit I've said here about recognition and respect for shared investment and responsibility. Roll the way back to my first statement about the Olympic movement. There are 4, in that case, there are 4 people that participate. There's the AOC, there's government, there's the sport itself, and there's the individual. In the industry we're talking about, there is government funds, there are levies from growers, there's the R&D investment that comes in itself, there is universities that participate, but the one that doesn't get counted is the dollars that's invested by farmers in doing their own work and their integration and how it works. And so we need to have this recognition and respect for shared investment. And it's even when you talk about DAFWA, it's, the last 5 years, it's been sort of almost left out of this flag waving and appraisal of what's been doing because it hasn't contributed necessarily to cash. The R&D corporations have got the cash, which is terrific, but then it's got to match it with the DAFWAs of the world, and what they put in is people and resources of infrastructure and the knowledge base that's there. And I think we need to get a slight rebalance in how that works on its way through. And so this collaboration needs to have some little adjustment on the way through. I talk about investing in leadership, capability and capacity, and that's right the way up and down the scheme. And that's the leadership of the groups, the leadership of the different parts of industries. Let's go back and invest in those. Digital disruption, it's great fun at the moment. You know, you can play with anything you like if you're that way inclined. And some of us old warhorses, we sort of fumble away with fingers and thumbs, but we get there. But I always ring up my kids to let me know, you know, and I'm sure my 5-year-old grandson in another 5 years is going to say, move over, Grandad, you know, just get in here and make this thing work. We need to move from precision to decision. And so there is so much information and investment we can make. How can we turn that into better decision making? Competitive collaboration, and this is where I'm talking about really, you know, how do we actually bring some of these things together? There was a time in place where rural press at the time was the bitter enemy of Condina Group because we both published magazines. And I had the temerity at some stage to go and suggest that we had a partnership together, that they had a database of 200,000 farmers, we had the content and knowledge information. But it was a bridge too far to get the corporate sector to join up with the grower group, and it never quite got to come to fruition. But it did work with CSIRO, it did work with New South Wales farmers, and so there's this notion of competitive collaboration. Bring it down to the group level. We can still be competitive in the regions, but we need to be collaborative in how we make that behaviour work. I've not talked about the business modelling because there's the hub and spoke model, there's some great work happening in Mingy Irving Group, there's some great work happening in Sepwa and Southern Dirt in how we start to provide some of those. Let's build on that. Interoperability is a word you're going to hear in the next 12 months. It's about how to think systems join together. How do they interoperate? In the machinery sector, we used to have this whole thing of OEMs, original equipment manufacturer, and Case, John Deere, New Holland, they'd all put out a tyre, but the hub was different, slightly different size, so you couldn't change them over. It's the same in this development of database management. How do we get this interoperability? And then how do we have my group as part of an interface to a knowledge bank? So you can have this sort of dashboard that's my group, but you can have behind the scenes, where do we put all this knowledge base? Where do we put all this information? DAFWA's got some amazing knowledge. GRDC has got some amazing capacity. MLA has got some amazing capacity. How do we get simple access through my group, for example? Let's use the technology and bring it in. And then there's virtual administration. I think there's a lot of scope, and I'll bring back that example of the 5 projects that are in the Midlands. And you know, there's 5 lots of auditing, there's 5 lots of management, there's 5 lots of HR. How can we make one and put the extra 100 grand, 200 grand back into the system and make it work better? So I think that there's, and that's just one example. I don't mean to be rude and picking on that one, but if you look through those, and it happens every day of the week. The investment, whatever it is, must improve the profitability. What's your KPI? Do we want to have 2% productivity improvement? What's the profitability on the farm level? Is it an 8% return after the land price? What is it we want to try and achieve? And will it improve our decision-making capacity? And if we answer those 2 questions, we might, at the other end of the day, give ourselves a medal. Thank you very much.